Here we are, Global Sociology Live. Last time, this is the 14th time we're meeting, and this is the last session of this most exciting semester. Most exciting. And you remember we began with saying this was an experiment? Well, it's been a pretty successful experiment. We've traversed the world in multiple ways and dealt with lots of different subjects. And so today we're going to try and summarize. And first you're going to introduce yourselves to the world, and then Lali and I will have a little conversation, and then we'll all exchange our views about global sociology. So, all right, so we'll go around the room, and each of you will just present yourself and your thoughts about global sociology. Do you want to start, Laura?
Yes.
Very good. Who are you?
So, hello, my name is Laura. I am originally from Mexico City, and I'm currently a senior majoring in American Studies with my concentration in U.S. foreign policy and globalization. So, global sociology has given me a broader insight not only into the theoretical aspects of globalization and what shapes this phenomenon, but also scholarship based on empirical evidence which truly provides an appreciation of what abstract elements like neoliberalism and counter-movements look like on the ground and the actual impact that they have on different communities throughout the world.
Very good.
My name is Erin Bastardestan. I'm an exchange from the University of Bergen, studying sociology and holding a previous bachelor in philosophy. In addition, I have a formal background in history, political science and Latin. I've enjoyed engaging in the construction and subsequent study of our sociological subfield, meeting the perceived luminaries of the broader sociological tradition, and watching them interact with and being held account to the various positions within our hastily constructed field of global sociology.
Very good.
Hi, my name is Sandra Nunez. I'm from Peru. I've really enjoyed this class. One of the things that struck me the most is that even though we think this world is so different, the struggles around this world are quite similar. When I am amazed by Michael, Lale, and all my classmates, because it's very clear that all of us just want the best for this world. I'm interested in politics, gender, and identity in Peru.
Hey everyone, my name is Jelena. I am from Croatia, but I'm studying in Italy where I'm pursuing a master's degree in sociology. I'm an exchange student here at UC Berkeley where I'm enjoying the dynamic and enriching American academia. Although a couple of our distinguished guest speakers touched upon the topic of migration, I would like us to expand on that discourse since it has clear and immediate implications on the global level.
I'm Ida Skjær. I'm an exchange student from Norway. I have a degree in international studies and in sociology from Oslo, Cairo, and now UC Berkeley. Global Sociology Live has convinced me that the tools for understanding global processes lie within a framework of sociology. And even though I think what we've been studying here is just one approach of many to global sociology, I have truly enjoyed being part of this class.
Hi, my name is Pil Christensen, and I'm an exchange student from Denmark, from the University of Copenhagen, where I'm a master's student in sociology. Besides that, I have a bachelor degree from University of Roskilde in social science and work-life studies, which was called industrial sociology in the 1970s. The Global Sociology course has given me knowledge about and tools to approach a world shaped by prevalent neoliberalization and where structures of capitalism are organizing principles, even though taking on many different forms. And this is something which make it necessary to make analysis that cross all forms of traditional borders. And I think that's something we have been starting on here in this course.
Hi, I'm Angelica Conde. Global Sociology connects to international social realities through Gramsci's lens of state, economy, and civil society. And although it has demonstrated the salience of religion, it has nevertheless reaffirmed the power of knowledge.
Hello, I'm Lilia Demilian, sociology major originally from Moscow, Russia. Global sociology has helped solidify the fact that our world is inexplicably interconnected and intertwined, one where we have to accept and cherish our differences, the same differences that create its dynamic and beautiful character, and so we all have to take care of each other, even with the smallest of gestures as a smile.
Hi, my name is Megan. I'm a sociology major with a minor in public policy. And throughout my time here in my major, I've devoted much of my time to understanding how institutions and structures perpetuate inequality on the national level. But this course has taught me that as our world becomes increasingly globalized via avenues of communication, trade, technology, and labor, that transnational inequality and the interplay of power dynamics becomes a salient area of study for sociologists.
Hi, my name is Sonam. I'm a fourth-year senior studying sociology and global poverty. This course in global sociology repeatedly made me realize that if we understand the principles behind a process, we can change some part of our world or perhaps invent something new. So I truly feel that this class made me realize that we are not just sociological thinkers, but also sociological innovators.
Hey, my name is Rachael Wong, and I'm a fourth-year sociology major and Portuguese minor. All of this course has demonstrated the possibility of alternative realities. The overwhelming majority of guest lecturers from the global north and post-British colonial societies indicates to me that it's still a work in progress, but one that should be progressed.
My name is Jesse Sanchez, and I'm a graduating senior from the School of Sociology here at UC Berkeley. I'm originally from Los Angeles, and through our discussions with scholars from the Global South, I learned that to some sociologists, particularly in the Global South, sociology has necessarily had a global scope of analysis because some of the most salient forces in their societies come from beyond their borders.
Hi, my name is Kevin Rachael. I'm a double major in sociology and political economy, and I've really enjoyed the privilege of being able to get up close and critical with very prominent academics and trying to understand the institutions and inequalities of the globalizing world.
Hi, my name is Brian Jimenez, and I'm a product of Inglewood, California. As a political science and sociology double major, I'm interested in the capacity of sociology and social theory to trigger and elucidate social change. For this reason, I was and am deeply struck by Eric Wright's call to action for sociologists to exercise critical theory, which could be understood as sociology geared not only to describing the world we live in, but also to attempt to make it more just for all.
Hi, my name is Ali DeVita, and I'm constructing my own major within the field of interdisciplinary studies, combining philosophy, Buddhist studies, and sociology. And I've been most interested in watching the transformation of individuals and nations as we shift to the global perspective. And I've found that having optimistic theories is the best way to at least lay a ground and have the possibility of a better future.
Hi, I'm Tian. I'm an integrative biology and sociology double major, and I'm finishing my last semester here. I'm interested in global health, so I wanted to take global sociology to widen my sociological lens and understand the world and understand how the world has been increasingly intertwined.
Hi, my name is Will. I'm a third-year sociology major. Just wanted to shout out to the world, all you guys on YouTube. And say that from this seminar, I've learned that fighting the system is tough, but to do it in the company of Professor Burawoy, Lale, and my peers, and of course Sushi, it's very enjoyable. And lastly, neoliberalism sucks.
Hi, my name is Camilla, and I'm an economic grad student on exchange from Norway. I've always been interested in the inequalities and poverty that permeates our world, and especially in the north-south divide, and how to lessen this inequality. And this class has made me much more critical when working with my economic models and seeing how they actually affect the real world instead of just a world with assumptions.
Hi, my name is Rachael Horning. I'm a third-year sociology major and gender and women's studies and public policy minor, and I'm from Los Angeles, not quite Inglewood. So yeah, this course has shown me that with the onset of technology, globalization, and neoliberalism,
understanding the global ramifications of political, social, and economic activity will increase in real world and academic relevance, and it'll be up to our generation to decide what to do with this unprecedented question of our future. And that's really cool.
Hi, my name is Denise. I'm a senior, and
Speak up.
I'm majoring in integrative biology and sociology, and I'm really interested in how social institutions impact health and how different movements lead to different health outcomes. And one thing that this class taught me was that health is, it can be impacted, by different social institutions. Like, for example, going green was, our discussion on going green, it really showed me that it's not just, a movement towards, betterment of the world, but it can also interplay with different neoliberal agendas.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Hampton. I'm a fourth-year sociology major. The reason I decided to take this course is because I was interested in how social theory was applied in a non-Western context. However, by taking this course, I've realized that Western social theory has been very influential in shaping social theory elsewhere around the world.
Hi, my name's Tani Kaiser. I'm a third-year sociology major and public policy minor. Week to week, guest to guest, Global Sociology affirmed my belief in education for all as an essential tool for bringing possibilities for change across physical and intellectual divides. And I totally agree with Eric Wright's observation of this course as being a real utopia in the sense that it provided space for exciting and wide-ranging discussions, which should definitely continue.
Hi, I'm Eric Porter. I'm a transfer junior from Petaluma, California. And despite my pessimism, I believe that a better world is inevitable with the application of global perspectives in sociology.
Hi, my name is Erin Benavides. I am a double major in sociology and rhetoric, and I work on assignments for this course, or I did work on assignments for this course 4 days out of the week, but I think about sociology, and I've thought about sociology almost every day, which means that I've become intolerable to both family and friends.
My name is Billy. I'm originally from New Orleans, and I'm an interdisciplinary field studies major, and I study the role of social movements in reproducing governance and capital internationally. And what makes this course special to me, or maybe also what makes the past few decades special, is the necessity to think outside the boundaries of the nation state. And I especially like where and when global sociology allows us to think and theorize the different conditions that may open possibilities to produce counter movements that, or counter forces that may challenge a globalizing capital.
Hi, my name is Alexandria O, and I'm a third year studying economics and sociology with a concentration in economic globalization. I really enjoyed this course because it complemented and greatly expanded upon my economic interests by providing a more global sociological perspective about the increasing interdependence of national economies and the resulting power dynamics.
Hi, my name is Grace, and I'm a fourth year double majoring in sociology and social welfare. And my area of interest within the field of sociology has been sociology of culture. And I believe that this class in global sociology has taught me the underpinnings of the processes of social development and how much they have transcended national borders. And I believe that these processes of social development have not only influenced the global economy, but this class has clarified for me how they have also intertwined with smaller social processes in various nations that we have studied throughout this course.
Wow. Very good.
I didn't possibly follow that.
Yes. What are we going to do now? Perhaps we should end the course here.
Yes.
No, Lali and I are going to have a little discussion. I should say I'm Michael Burawoy, and this has been the most exciting course I must have ever taught. I mean, one never knew what was going to happen from week to week. It's exciting because it was really a wonderful conversation with you and with Lali and with the various people who have been running the camera here and with so many people in different parts of the world. And we haven't had really any catastrophe, which is amazing. Nope. So
we've hidden it nicely. So.
That's right. So what we're going to do is going to have a little discussion, Lali and I, and then we're going to open it up for a discussion across all of us. So you've obviously got definite views about global sociology, so we will try and embrace them. But I want to start today, in a sense, to go back to the beginning. And actually, I want to raise a question from the get-go, is what we might mean by a global sociology, but not only what we mean by a global sociology, the risks of actually even talking about a global sociology. If I were to go to India today, or if I were to go to South Africa, or perhaps even if I were to go to Brazil and say that I'm a global sociologist and I give a talk on global sociology, people would be very suspicious. Here is somebody from the north coming to talk about global sociology. Their immediate reaction would be what? It would be that, this gentleman is actually going to present a northern perspective, but it's going to be sort of dressed up in a sort of universal sociology for all. And it's interesting because the history of sociology is precisely the way in which the particular has masqueraded as the universal. So, for example, we can begin with the sociology in the United States, the famous Chicago School of the end of the 19th century, the first 2 or 3 decades of the 20th century, a very famous school of sociology. But really that sociology was about the city of Chicago. They talked about it being a universal sociology. They pretended that Chicago was the universal, not just the universal city, but the universal society. And the universal society of the future. But now we know today that actually Chicago is not London, it's not Paris, it's not Delhi, it's not Sao Paulo. That in fact many of the claims that were made in the Chicago school about the city were actually specific to Chicago. So the universal was actually about Chicago. And if you look at post-war, post-Second World War sociology in the United States, basically that was a sociology about the United States. And as you all know now, the United States is a very strange place. So any claims that are made about the United States are probably not going to work in most of the world. Again, that sociology was disseminated around the world as a sort of universal sociology, but it was actually a sociology that was quite peculiar and particular to the United States. And so I think we have to be very careful. First, the point about a global sociology is that we do become conscious of the extraordinary variety, despite the idea that somehow globalization leads to homogenizing, and we become conscious of the variety of societies which occupy this planet, and that we should be very careful not to overgeneralize from conclusions from one society. And that we should think about global sociology not as a universal sociology, but as a sociology that has sort of specific geographical locations. So we have to do a sociology, I think, from different points in the planet.
And I think that we can't emphasize this enough, because we may have all kinds of debates about what global sociology is, what it should be, but I think one thing that is clear is what it should not be. And it should not be yet another kind of projection of the perspective or the experience of the U.S. or the global North more generally upon the rest of the world, and this time in the name of a global sociology. And I think that we've, maybe not always successfully, but we've attempted to be kind of attentive to that danger, right? And we have in a few ways. One is we've really tried, most importantly, to bring a variety of voices into this conversation. So we've brought in speakers from Colombia, South Africa, India, Lebanon, the Philippines, And they've brought their perspectives to this conversation. And also, I should say, we've also been very lucky to have a good amount of diversity in our own classroom here among ourselves, right? So we have students from Peru and Mexico and Croatia and Norway and Denmark, who have all kind of brought their perspectives and have been really kind of good about, at times, checking us and when we get a little maybe too US-centric. So we've been lucky to have that as well. And so aside from kind of trying to make sure there's a diversity of voices, I think we've also tried to be willing to think critically about the concepts that we use, the assumptions that we have, the theories that we use. And as we've all seen, we've had many people come in and actually push us to be a little more critical about whether or not these assumptions or these concepts are actually globally applicable or not. So we've done that. And I think perhaps finally, and Jesse brought this up, we've also, I think, tried to just be aware that while global sociology may be a relatively new endeavor in the US or in Europe, for many people in the global South, thinking globally has been necessary for a long time, right? So for scholars in the global South, explaining or making sense of their own societies has long necessitated an account of how perhaps other nation states have played a role in shaping their societies, whether through a history of colonialism, imperialism, through a certain geopolitics, and global institutions have played a profound role in shaping their societies, whether it's the World Bank or the IMF. So in that sense, in fact, maybe it's actually also time to kind of take the lead of scholarship in the global South in terms of really thinking carefully about how global processes come to shape any particular place in the world. So, I mean, but this all speaks to the question of when we say global sociology, what do we mean by global and what do we not want to mean by global? But it still leaves us with this kind of more basic question of what do we mean by sociology and what is sociology, right?
Oh, you're going to answer that question?
I hope you're going to answer that question.
Oh, this is the question, of course, no sociologist wants to talk about. And, of course, the danger is that we will actually fall into the trap of, again, sort of taking a northern perspective. So, as you remember, many of you will remember the first class we had, and Peel will remind us of all the problems of the formulations that are about to be displayed. We drew on, you may recall, two gentlemen. One was Antonio Gramsci, who's from Italy, from southern Italy, from Sardinia. And the other was a fellow called Polanyi, who was from Hungary. Now notice that these are two gentlemen. You might say they're from Europe, but actually they're from the periphery of the core. They're from the semi-periphery. So Hungary and Italy were both sort of countries that were indeed quite conscious as sort of in the periphery of Europe, quite conscious of the domination of countries around them. So I think we sort of maybe on sort of good terrain to start with their ideas. Well, I hope so, because we are going to, yet again, reiterate, I have not given up this idea of civil society. Very problematic concept, yes. All right, so what is sociology? Well, as I said in the first class, and I have not yet shifted my position, that sociology takes the standpoint of civil society. And civil society is an idea, at least in the framework that I've been using, is an idea of Antonio Gramsci, who claimed that at the end of the 19th century in Europe there developed social movements, organizations, networks, institutions that were neither part of the market nor part of the state. And for him that was very important in terms of how it absorbed conflict and led to a very different understanding of how capitalism reproduced itself. So that's the beginning. I'm going to actually draw a picture, if you can follow me to the board. And this very famous picture, the last time we used the board, yes, okay. Over here we had, yes, the economy. I don't like that marker. Okay. There's nothing special about the shape here, but this is the state. And the claim is that there is something like civil society. That's right, very good.
A change in perspective.
Okay, well, in trying to make it overlap with the economy and the state, I've obviously made it look like the United States of America, but well, anyway. So this civil society did emerge at the end of the 19th century in Europe, and of course has spread its way, has found its way into many parts of the globe. The idea is that sociology takes the standpoint of this civil society, so it studies the economy from the standpoint of studies the state from the standpoint of civil society. Whereas the economics, as a profession, economics studies the economy, or studies the world from the standpoint of the economy, and political science, we may briefly, crudely say, takes is a standpoint from within the state, looking at political order. Now, of course, all these disciplines are much more complex, and they're all actually terrains of struggle themselves. But nevertheless, I think this is a broad point of departure, and immediately we can say that civil society, it's not clear what the boundaries are. They overlaps with the economy, overlaps with the state. So sociology overlaps with economics, overlaps with political science. In some places, civil society doesn't exist. It's very, what do they say? What did Gramsci say, you remember? Primordial and gelatinous, that's right. So some societies where civil society hardly exists, sociology hardly exists. Civil society can be very fragmented. Sociology is correspondingly very fragmented. So one can argue that this indeed is a good point of departure, I hope. The question is, and this is now where Polanyi enters, is where on earth does this civil society come from? Because Gramsci never tells us. And this is where it gets interesting, because Polanyi argues in his book, The Great Transformation, that civil society, or what we are calling civil society, what he calls generally society, is in fact a reaction to the overextension of the economy. When the economy overextends itself, when, for him, land, labor, and money become commodities, then it threatens the existence of the social fabric, and there's a counter-movement, and civil society is constituted. So in the 19th century, there emerges civil society, trade unions, political parties, cooperatives, self-help organizations that react to the overexpansion of the capitalist economy. That is a story that Polanyi tells, essentially, of Britain, but it could be told for many different parts of the world. So that's essentially the account here. It's a combination of Gramsci and Polanyi. So, all right, fine. That is how we situate sociology and how we think about sociology. The question is, of course, where in this picture global sociology emerges. Well, you would say immediately, and this is, I suppose, the premise of this framework, is that a global sociology depends upon the existence of a global civil society. And we will discuss in the next few minutes exactly whether there is a global civil society, but it is a global sociology takes the standpoint of a global civil society. And where would a global civil society come from? It would come from, in this broad Polanyian framework, from the expansion of the economy into a global order. Now, of course, the capitalist economy has always been, in a sense, global. But I think, and this is where we began with David Harvey, what is characteristic of the contemporary global capitalism, particularly its financial basis and its neoliberal project, is that it is beyond the control of nation states. It is beyond the control of nation states. So different. For example, the crisis of 2008 showed precisely how the contemporary capitalism is outside the control of the USA in a way that during the Depression, the economy, in a sense, was subject to and could be orchestrated under the direction of the state. So I think we're living in a world in which global capitalism somehow is often aided and abetted by states, but nonetheless is outside the reach of states. And so we need, in a sense, you might argue, a counter-movement in the Polanyi sense, or a counter-movement would involve some sort of emergent global civil society, because states by themselves cannot contain this global capitalism. Of course, it's not clear whether, in fact, civil society, or global civil society could, but it's probably our best hope is to think about a global civil society as at least one element of containing the destructive features of global capitalism. And that's what we saw, the destructive features of global capitalism. We saw that with Michael Watts's discussion of the exploration of oil in the Niger Delta and the devastation of the communities there, and the way in which Nigeria's whole society is held together by these very fragile bonds of the market, of economy, of money that really doesn't hold society together. It becomes a substitute for building national institutions. We heard from Ananya Roy about the rise of a new form of finance capital from below. So microfinance, how it spreads, creates participation, developmental projects from below, but actually hooks into the circulation of finance capital at the global level. And so from there we began to ask the questions that were raised by Ananya Roy about the way this finance capital was orchestrated at the global level. We went and had this discussion, wonderful discussion with Walden Bello, who told us about the history of the IMF, the World Bank, and the WTO. These are the sort of political organizations that orchestrate the reproduction of global capitalism. Yes. And after Bello, we turned actually, as I recall, we turned to Ching Quan Li. You remember Ching Quan Li told us about China. China, no course on global sociology can ignore China. And Ching Quan Li talked about the ways in which the Chinese state became a central player in the orchestration of the extraordinary expansion of the Chinese economy. And in a sense, the question was raised, now, is this a form of neoliberalism? So what does Harvey call it? Neoliberalism with Chinese characteristics. Is this neoliberalism? So and that was an interesting paradox about Harvey's argument. Remember that Harvey's argument talks about neoliberalism as a sort of utopia. It couldn't be realized. It had these elements, the idea of privatization, deregulation, and the expansion of the market. Everything becomes commodified. And what we ask is this what's going on in China? Well, certainly over time one could argue that China has actually sort of developed the market under the sponsorship of the party state. But the state is really crucial in this project. The thing you might say about China, and this was the other side of the Harvey argument, is that neoliberalism in a sense is an ideology that cannot be realized on its own terms, but it's an ideology that hides what? That hides a project of the dominant class. It's basically a project of enrichment of the dominant class. And you might say that that has taken place in China, that we have some of the most wealthy dominant class emerging in places like China and India, sort of in the name of marketization. But the point is, I think, the crucial point is that Harvey talks a lot about the economy and civil society, and that's what Ananya Roy and Michael Watts did. But the state, where is the state in all this? And I'm going to let Lali talk about the state.
I'm the state.
The state. The state in black.
Yeah, no, I think... So I think that actually Lee, that was a real turning point for us in the class, right? Because before that, our focus was really fixed on capital. Even if we look to the state or civil society, our main focus was on capital, on global capital. And she kind of brought the state to the forefront for the first time. And so that kind of raised the question of, well, clearly states, they play a major role in imposing or managing forms of marketization. They often kind of serve the interests of capital. All of that had become clear over the weeks, right? But now the question emerged, do states also govern their societies by logics that maybe aren't always so clearly understandable through the lens of the economy or through neoliberalism, right? Do states sometimes operate by their own logics that we can't necessarily explain always via reference to the economy? And that's where Hanafi came in for us, because he was the first person to really just focus on the state and its own logic of governing. In this case, he was talking about the Israeli state, right? And how the Israeli state attempts to govern the Palestinian population. And he gave us this concept of spatiocide as a way of understanding the Israeli state strategy, right? Spatiocide as opposed to genocide, right? As opposed to a kind of outright extermination, he argued that the Israeli state strategy was one of spatiocide in the sense of making Palestinian spaces unlivable, right? And thus kind of rendering the Palestinian population to what he called bare life. And he also gave us one other concept, state of exception, right? And he argued that another strategy was that the state was essentially using a state of exception to manipulate a legal framework that ultimately ended up denying Palestinians of their rights. So Hanafi kind of pushed us to think about the state, and then we shifted from the Israeli state to the U.S. state. And I attempted to talk a bit about the U.S.'s, project of counterterrorism. And argued that, it also, too, in a way, is a state of exception, right? Where the U.S. is able to bypass the rule of law in its pursuit of terrorists. But I also tried to think about whether or not this is actually a global project, right? Whether the U.S.'s war on terror, which I attempted to illustrate, actually shows us that there's increasing linkages among different states, right? That the U.S. state actually now was linked to the intelligence agencies of various other nations that were now serving essentially as proxies for the U.S. government in its war on terror. So we started to actually just think about, do we see the emergence of a global security state, right? So for this period, we kind of were thinking about global capital, and then we start to think about the state and whether or not we can think about states in global terms. And finally, that, of course, brings us back to what's drawn as the United States of America, but is supposed to be civil society, right? How to think about civil society, right?
How to think about civil society. So this is the heart of the project of a global sociology. Yes, and what is interesting about it, having spoken about the global capitalism on the one side and the logic of states on the other, one often sees actually that civil society is a victim of and is subordinated to the state and economy. In fact, state and economy in this era, what I call third wave marketization, is actually in this era, civil society is under threat. And therefore, of course, by the way, sociology is therefore, in a sense, under threat. So the question is are there grounds, are there foundations for a global civil society? And how might one think about it, and how one might study it, and how one might study the rest of the world from its standpoint? Well, we had to start with the great optimist of sociology, my colleague Peter Evans, who told us about what he called counter-hegemonic globalization. And that was a vision of globalization from below, a globalization what would be built upon a global civil society. And you remember how you were very skeptical, and we had about an hour a discussion here.
I think you were more skeptical than they were.
Oh, yes. Oh, all right.
He's projecting his skepticism.
I'm glad there are some defenders of Peter Evans here. But I do remember that next door when we went afterwards, for 2 hours you harassed him with all sorts of questions.
That's because you bribed them with sushi.
That's right. That's right. It was very tasty sushi, wasn't it, Will? It was. Well, anyway, there's no doubt about it that he was an optimist. No doubt about that. And so he brought us, he talked about the labor movement. He didn't give us any details. And he talked about the environmental movement. He sort of made some reference to the women's movement. But we wanted more detail. We wanted something concrete. So next week we called up Eddie Webster in South Africa, who has been very much a devotee of the possibilities of a global labor movement, international working class solidarity, particularly South-South alliances, South-South labor alliances. Well, you know, he did talk about the possibilities of connections across national boundaries between labor, for example, South Africa and Brazil, South Africa and India. But, you know, in my view, and again, I might be projecting that in the end he spent a lot of time talking about, yes, global standards, labor standards, but also they were instantiated, they were enforced where at the national level. The nation state cannot be ignored in all this. And in fact, many of the struggles that would be required for developing global standards would have to first take place at the national level. So, you know, he was backtracking in a sense of national. It wasn't clear whether there was more than an embryonic form of a global civil society. And then we talked to Amita Baviska, right, about the environmental movement and how she talked specifically about India. Fascinating story about the environmental movement and its class character, and to what extent the environmental movement actually reproduces capitalism. It's the sort of soft side of neoliberalism. Though when she talked to us, actually, she did say that, you know, in the rural areas of India, there was now legislation that sort of did benefit the excluded and those who had been dispossessed of their land, whether it be by dams or these special economic zones. So there were real struggles in the rural areas that were defending the rights of the peasantry. But, well, it still wasn't really a global civil society. So where did we go next? Does anybody remember? Because I'm just blinking at this moment. Where did we go after Baviska? We went to Eric Wright. Now I want to postpone Eric Wright, and I want to talk about the person we want to talk about. Yes, Cesar Rodriguez Garavito. Thank you, Ali. Now, what was interesting about his analysis of the indigenous struggles, indigenous communities in Colombia and also in Latin America, was the ways in which those communities partook in a global legal field. He actually called it a social minefield, because, of course, this global legal field was, in a sense, shaped by the quite violent struggles of the paramilitary on the one side and FARC on the other, the guerrilla movement in Colombia. But what was interesting is how the indigenous community leaders felt that it was their only way forward was to partake in this global field that included, indeed, representatives of the indigenous community, NGOs, the state, transnational corporations, and then at the global level, United Nations and the ILO. That this global field actually contained and constrained the depredations of international capitalism, and also the way that the Colombian state colluded with international capitalism. So, in a sense, what we find with his analysis, with Cesar's analysis, is the ways in which it is not a horizontal set of movements that are emerging, but there is a struggle on the terrain of a global, hierarchical, vertical global field, global legal field in his case. So in a sense, that the opportunities lay within that field rather than perhaps across fields, across national boundaries. Though, of course, movements do learn from one another, and they do participate in what one might call a global legal field. Different movements from different countries might participate in that same field. But then we had one alternative way of looking at the counter movement, and that was, and two of you have already mentioned him, obviously he inspired a number of you here, Eric Wright, who talked about real utopia. So rather than looking for transnational social movements, transnational linkages, he looked for institutions, real concrete institutions that posed a potential challenge to the logic of capitalism. And what was he talking about? He talked about participatory budgeting that has spread through Latin America and hasn't even come to this country. He talked about cooperatives. He talked about Wikipedia as a sort of an institution organization, and in some way in its fundamental self-organization, collective self-organization, was a challenge, he thought, to global capitalism, or potentially such. So this was a very different way of thinking about the counter movement from below, for thinking what he called real utopias, that is, in looking for concrete institutions that might challenge capitalism. So that's where we sort of, that sort of summarizes, I suppose, where we are.
And I mean, in many ways it left us in a somewhat kind of sad ending in the sense that we went looking, obviously, for a global, we went looking for global capital, and that hit us right away. There was no doubt. Nobody was questioning capital is global, right? We went looking at states, and whether or not there's a global security state, it was clear that at least certain states have global reach, for sure, right? And then we went looking for a global civil society, and we went looking everywhere for a trace of it, right? We went to South Africa, we went to India, we went to Colombia. In the end, we went to Utopia, right? And and still, we had to come out with the conclusion that, at least at the present moment, there's no global civil society that we can really speak of, right? At most, we can perhaps say that there's some kind of embryonic form of one, right? Which, of course, then brings us back to this original point at the beginning, right? If Michael's, formulation of global sociology, or that sociology is studying the world from the perspective of civil society, if there's no global civil society, then what does that mean for global sociology? And you're definitely answering this one.
I think we can just end the course here. No, all right. We're going to give you an answer. All right. Well, it is the case, I think, yes, that there is not a powerful global civil society. I think that's one of the empirical conclusions, at least tentative conclusions of our course. So what then would be a global sociology? I think a global sociology would be precisely those institutions, economic, political, legal, that make a global civil society very difficult to organize. You remember Walden Bellow? We asked him, what is global sociology? He didn't blink an eyelid. He said, global sociology is the study of those multilateral institutions, and how, you might add, or I might add, how they effectively make it very difficult for there to be a global civil society. And how, in fact, they also at the same time generate, like the WTO, the sorts of protests that he was involved in, how the protests against the WTO actually begin to build an embryonic global civil society. So one way, I think, to think about a global sociology today is to think about the ways in which the institutions, whether they be states, nation states, whether they be transnational collaborations among capitalists, whether they be the logic of supranatural national power, to think about how they actually undermine, fragment, and make difficult and incapacitate the development of a global civil society. So that's the first approach. The second approach is to work with what we got. This embryos, the embryos. And this is a sort of, I suppose, an Eric Wright perspective. So we work with the embryos of a global civil society. There are embryos, there are collaborations among labor movements across national boundaries. The human rights organizations do transcend national boundaries. And we have to be aware, and we should be very aware, that this global civil society, this embryonic one, is often a very unequal one. It's a very one made up of great differentials of power, but there are embryos there. There are embryos there. And even Eric Wright's real utopias do sometimes spread around the world. In fact, that's one of the functions of the sociologist, is to constitute them as real utopias that can be actually incorporated and planted in different countries. So I think the second approach to a global sociology is to work with what we got, to work with the embryos of a global civil society. But I think there's a third point to be made. And the third point is, if there is no global civil society, or if it is only embryonic, then we as global sociologists have to constitute the object of study. We have to constitute ourselves as part of a global civil society, and that means conducting conversations like the ones that we have begun here in this class. We have to start conducting conversations of a transnational character. And I think we've also got to think about actually creating and fostering institutions in the way that Eric Wright talked about. So I think that what sociology today means, if we're going to think of it from a global perspective, and I think ultimately we have no alternative, if we're going to think about it from a global perspective, I think we have to think about sociology not as trying to explain a world out there, which is the legacy of sociology, and the sort of the scientific sociology of Durkheim and Weber, of Marx. Now there's the world out there and we're trying to explain it. Or we look back and study history from the standpoint of the present. But no, we have to have another approach to the world. We have to recognize that we are part of the world and that we are constituting the world we are studying. We are making the car we are driving. Pretty difficult. Just imagine that. Constructing the car that you are driving. So we have to, I think we've got to think about sociology in new terms. We've got to think about our participation in constructing the very object we are studying. And that, of course, means that we have to be a type of sociologist. Has two features. One, we have to be very reflexive about who we are, where we are. We have to, and to be very reflexive means that we have to engage in conversations with people in different parts of the world, different classes, different genders. We have to be very sensitive to who we are. So we have to engage in a pluralization of conversations. And I think we also have to be public sociologists. That is to say, sociologists that engage with the world in a self-conscious way, not just to change the world, but to constitute a sociology that grapples with the issues of today, issues that are of a global character. So that is where I sort of think now after this course, where global sociology, where we land with global sociology.
I have maybe a fourth approach.
Ah, Lali.
Yeah. So maybe a fourth approach to building a global sociology is for you and I maybe to be quiet for a minute and actually see what do you all say. What do you think? Like, what are your approaches? What have you come out of this thinking about? How to build a global sociology, what global sociology means.
$1 million question.
Okay, so Brian and then Sandra.
So maybe this doesn't necessarily apply to global sociology, but I had this thought while you were speaking. So the primary way in which civil society has traditionally combated capitalism was through using the state to stifle economic liberalism. To protect society and the social good. So the state has been civil society's central tool. Unlike civil society, though, capitalism has never needed a global state in order to thread the world. So perhaps a global civil society cannot flourish without a global state in which it would act through.
Uh-huh. Have we seen a global state?
Attempts, but not. They haven't been maybe strong enough in which, let's say, a global civil society could actually act through. I don't know.
Jesse, you want to speak to this?
Yeah. So I would agree that there isn't a global state and there isn't a global government, but there is global governance, right? We talked with Rodriguez about kind of a global political order, right? Maybe United Nations serving as kind of a institution or a sphere where many different societies and many different states can kind of interact. And I think that when you look at sociology outside of the domestic scope and you move it to this scope, you can see that there are many civil society institutions and organizations that I think do exist. I think it'd be very difficult to say there is not a global civil society. I think that our colleague Laura and all of her knowledge around the United Nations would say that there are many institutions like maybe Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International, these kind of extra state and economic global institutions. They do exist, and though it isn't a state, it is still like the global political order of governance. And I think that there is an interesting parallel there.
Want to continue this thread? Mm-hmm.
It's just this short comment in terms of the state, like what we see that the different states is doing and what some of the global structures of a state is doing right now. I think also, what we also learned from Harvey is facilitating capital and facilitating the growth of neoliberalization and and these kind of things. And I don't think I think we've come to a conclusion in this course that that's not the way we should go. So I have very difficulty seeing how we should promote or why we should promote a global state.
Uh-huh. You want to continue, Billy?
Yeah, I as well would feel really hesitant about using this language of states to describe something that is liberatory or emancipatory, just because the history of states has largely been, well, I mean, it is a large lie that the economy doesn't need a state to sort of produce itself. If the state, as we sort of used in this class, is about territory and monopoly of violence, then the economy is always bound to that mechanism or that apparatus. And civil society, or whatever we want to call it, any kind of counterforce has always been, in the end, squashed by that mechanism precisely. So is there a way, can we imagine sort of a counterforce that can control territory, can control means of violence, and not be a state?
Did you want to speak on this again?
Oh yeah, I just wanted to make a clarification that I wasn't promoting, let's say, the state for emancipatory, well-being in any way. But it was just kind of a random thought that I had.
But this is actually, this has been a long, like a running debate, if you think about it through the entire class, that many of the different speakers have taken very different positions on, right? So, we had people like, maybe you could say Roy or Harvey, that made very clear that states generally function to reproduce a neoliberal order, to serve the interests of capital, to serve the interests of certain classes. But then we also had people like, for example, Evans, particularly when it came to states in the global south, or definitely Eric Wright, or even Polanyi, right, that seemed to suggest to us that any effective counter-movement against capital and global capital either needs the state or can't afford to at least not consider how the state might be an ally, right? So that actually seems to be a point in which a lot of the people who come to speak with us stand on very different sides of that argument, right?
Good. Sandra, do you want to?
Yeah, well, I had a different
Yeah.
argument. I just wanted to say, I feel like, for me to even think of global sociology, I first have to think about sociology. And I feel like as students, we go to a university expecting to learn. And I think that it's key that we need to come into the universities expecting to actually create change, not just learn, and question these concepts of what is global sociology, what is global civil society. I think that sociology should turn into something that everyone in this world identifies with, regardless of gender, class, religion, or whatever. I think that it's important for sociology to go beyond the academics and make it accessible to the public. And you mentioned public sociology, and I think that sociology must be something that we all identify with, because even though we don't even know if we have a global civil society, something that we do know is that we are all humans and citizens of a country, although some groups don't have citizenship of some countries like the Bedouins. But regardless of that, we're all humans that we're constantly interacting, that we have necessities, and we're constantly interacting with states and with institutions and with schools and with society. We're interacting with the civil society that we're talking about. So we can analyze that, It doesn't have to be, we don't have to analyze global civil society in the academic context of what they teach us what global civil society is, but we can analyze groups like the one Cesar was talking about, or groups like the one Michael Watts was talking about, in the Niger Delta. And this is what I get from this class, that we challenge all these concepts, and we need to include everyone in sociology to make it really a science a science for humans,
Uh-huh.
So for sociology, for there to be global sociology, it has to be a kind of public sociology.
I think it's key, because we can't just leave. For me, I think, the academia sometimes can turn into a bubble. And academia needs to be in touch with the real world, not just researching about the real world, analyzing it, but actually trying to change the real world outside academia.
Angelica.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you that it starts, like, academia should definitely hold a position in, like, social change. But I think it also has to start within the relationships in classrooms in itself and the way, like, you know, everyone talks about collective change and social movements, yet oftentimes because we're in academia and we have these things called grades, people start, you know, individualizing, you know, their merit. And so I think it really needs to start, like, in the classroom in the way that you, like, you know, you should really act out on how you, what you're kind of preaching, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think from there it could stem to something else. But if it doesn't start from the classroom in itself and the way that it's organized, I don't see how it could be implemented outside.
Global sociology starts in the classroom. Eric.
Yeah, you know, one thing that struck me throughout most of the course, it seems like there's always these great things going on, whether they're in civil society or whatnot, NGOs and stuff, and it seems like capital has this way of kind of taking over it and, you know, turning it into some kind of profit machine or absorbing it and stuff like that. And so from a strategic standpoint, I think any type of movement or any type of initiative that doesn't, like, say, well, what's capital going to do in response to our movement, you know, and try and, you know, second guess capital if that's even possible. You know, I think that's a fundamental element of what our thinking should be like. Like, yeah, let's design something really great, but then again, let's look forward to see what capital is going to do in response to co-opt it and turn it into a profit-making type of mechanism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Why are you looking at me?
Okay, Pio.
Well, I want to say something different that I've also sometimes been saying before. I think that what this course has learned me and learned us is very much how the forces of capitalism and neoliberalism is absolutely destructive for our world. It's destructive of our physical world, our nature, our climate. It's destructive for our social relationships, and I think that's very, very obvious after having this course and in general learning sociology. And I think my problem with this model that we've been working with all the time, which divides civil society, the economy, and the state into three different realms, is that you don't see the actual productive forces in civil society, because what we end up, our solution ends in this course by being that we have civil society which should regulate the economy, like this Polanyian idea that we should just, like, if we just, like, regulate the economy, we don't want really bad neoliberal and capitalism. We want, like, something which is not that bad, but, like, I think we've just learned so much about how the forces and the structures of capitalism is not something that we just regulate and make it a nice capitalism that we can live with. The world we're seeing now is that capitalism would always work as something which is, somebody has to suffer if somebody else are having a good time. And I think that we should just take these things serious, and therefore we cannot work with a model which will end up in the end always like just having the solution about regulating capitalism. And therefore I think we have to develop new ideas of how we can change the way we are producing, and how we can basically change the way we regulate and how we also relate to each other. So I think we should try to develop a new model.
Well, we're probably out at what. Ivan, do you want to have the last word here?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the perennial problems we've been dealing with in these schematics of neo-Gramscian categorization and application of understanding Polanyi, who basically is descriptive of the models of society in a very normative way. And I feel that when we have read him as sort of that double movement is something that is a movement that you join. There's an elective membership, you sign up for it, and we try to ascertain whether or not any random social movement is part of this double movement. reading Polanyi, you discover that it's not that the case at all. I mean, it's a broad dialectic model of a sociological, immunological reaction to certain developments in society. It's relational and it's dialectical. It's probably got nothing to do with whatever you see on the ground. The models are didactic. But the actual applications of them in our society is sort of problematic due to the way they are structured. I mean, you use Gramscian models from the periphery of the European system in around the time of the Second World War, and you use Polanyi, who writes directly afterwards, and you attempt to analyse the current configurations of capitalist society. And what you don't take into account is that capitalist society is so intertwined with the state and society are so intertwined with the economy that it's almost impossible to ascertain the validity of the model we use. So
very good.
So
okay.
if we need, that means okay.
Let's start
So
sociology all over again.
right. So if our conclusion is that we need new models, then I think that falls on you all. You have a lot of work to do to start envisioning those new models. But Jelena also, if we can just let her have.
Yeah, sure.
It's kind of not very related to what we're talking about. So okay.
Continue.
So actually, that's the question I've been having throughout the entire time, because I have a kind of feeling that we're assuming that people want civil society to be strong, that people want civil society to be global, that people want civil society to be extremely present. But what struck me a lot was the lecture Qingquan Li gave us, and her phrase that when she asked a worker in China what he wanted economic rights, and he wanted a cell phone, and he wanted capital is good. When she asked them if they want some kind of political rights, freedom, and liberties, they were more focused on the capitalist side. So my kind of question is, are we kind of trying to impose something that maybe people are not really wanting?
Well, that's very important. But just take your example, right? Your worker wanted economic rights. Well, trade unions and civil society bring economic rights. Wanted a cell phone. Wanted a cell phone to communicate with other people. That's what happens in civil society. So that even in your example, there is a sort of embryonic endorsement of something that is not the economy. The worker did not want to be continually exploited. Didn't talk about let's not work 12 hours a day. Let's work 15 hours a day. Now, that's not what is being called for. So I think even in those terms, there is a sort of implicit aspiration for a, not necessarily global, of course, but for a local and then perhaps even national civil society. So I'm going to end on that very note, because that's so we've had a number of criticisms, and those who are most critical, we expect to see in the next few months a sort of refashioning of the model upon which we can think about global sociology. This is all very, very sort of experimental, not just the course, but also the framework. So yes, so we propose something, and we would love to see your alternative proposals. And I think, but nonetheless, we have a worker from China who has endorsed the framework that we are working with. So that is encouraging. No, he did not totally convinced. Okay, we have to end here, I'm afraid. We got 2 minutes left of our time. So all I'd like to say is you are all fantastic. We had a great time, and Lali was fantastic. I wouldn't have never dreamt of doing this course unless I had a Lali at my side. So really, we're feel very privileged to have been working with you, and we hope that your ideas, as I think it was Cesar said, that you must be the most famous students in the world these days. Everybody is watching you. So anyway, we hope you take these ideas from this course to the furthest corners of the planet. Okay, Laura?
Sure will.
Sure will. Okay. So thank you all very much.